to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hi.
Hey.
Well,
It's been a while since we did a book club.
It's been 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we kind of got away with not doing it because it was like New Year's Eve when we would have done the last one. So
We don't podcast on holidays, not those holidays.
Yeah. So if you're new, every month that we end up having 5 Fridays, which is not often, it's like 3 or 4 times a year, we read a book for that 5th Friday. It's our bonus book club. And
as book nerds, we both always wanted to have a book club. So we just made our own on the podcast. It's not really a book club.
Did I always want to have a book club?
I did. You didn't want a book club? People to just talk about books with all of us?
I was my own book club as a kid.
I was too, but it would have been fun to have people who were reading it at the same time as me. I always wanted to do that.
I didn't really, as a kid, I didn't talk about books with friends until Harry Potter. That was when... That was like the millennial book club.
It was. We were all reading it at the same time.
That became the day I would talk about books with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then my life was never the same after that.
Yeah, so we're trying to recreate it as adults. It's not really.
You can't recreate that magic. We can try. I don't get this. I got to be really honest with you. I don't get at all, like even close to the same vibe from nonfiction that I get from fiction. It doesn't do it for me.
It's not the same vibe. It's
people,
instructional.
Some people love nonfiction and they don't really like reading fiction. And I don't understand those people. I would never read a nonfiction book again and probably be fine with it.
I'm going to be honest with you. I can't do nonfiction. I've learned this about myself in books. I have to listen to them.
Yeah. I think they can read really boring, even if they're not.
Exactly.
Because there's not a plot.
Exactly. There's not a plot. Well, I should say there's like good biographies and that sort of thing that are more story based, but
a lot of self-help books aren't like that.
The self-help ones, I like the content, but I have to listen to it and I have to be like doing dishes or driving or something.
Yeah.
Because if I just sit down to read it,
all of this,
I will procrastinate.
Of course, excluding Forever Alone, which is a book that I wrote that is nonfiction that doesn't actually exist in book form yet anyway.
I did listen to all of that.
Is an auditory experience, but is told very much like a story with a plot on purpose. Mm-hmm. Did that for a reason. Anyway, go listen to Forever Alone if you're new to Clarity on Fire and you want to hear about my journey through singledom. Okay, so before we dive into Atlas of the Heart, which like all of this is not to shade Brené Brown, who is magnificent.
Well, and I say that particularly because Brene she's a fantastic writer, obviously. Most of you have probably read one of her books.
But she wouldn't say that that's her strength.
She's a much better narrator.
She's a teacher. She's a speaker.
So I listened to you read it and I listened.
I read and I watched her HBO special.
I watched part of her HBO.
I didn't finish it either. I have 2 more episodes left, but I've watched 3 out of 5.
And she's so great to listen to and watch. Yeah. She is a presenter. She's a speaker. And so if you haven't read this book, but then after you listen today, you want to go read it, I actually would recommend the audiobook.
Or watch the HBO special.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're going to get the same
the book is beautiful. Don't get me wrong.
It's a great
very
resource.
Beautiful. And it has illustrations and it's lovely.
But it's like a textbook on emotions.
It is.
Anyway, okay. But before we actually dive into that, I was going to remind people that I don't know what we're calling it now. Probably should have figured that out before I hit record. Oh, well,
maybe we're taking applications for new coaching clients
starting next week.
Next
Friday, the 6th. Yes, we are going to be accepting applications for new coaching clients. Make it sound as dry and boring as humanly possible,
I
Rachel.
thought you were going for like snooty.
I was kind of going for what's his name in Ferris Bueller.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah.
The teacher.
Mm-hmm.
What Bueller? That guy. I was going for him. So like kind of both. That worked. Like stuffy and snooty and kind of boring. Like a Professor Binns. If we're going to do Harry Potter.
Sure. Droning on and on and on.
But I think I'm more interesting than that. Like, give me credit for being a McGonagall at least.
Oh, well, yeah.
I feel like Brene Brown has Minerva McGonagall energy big time, by the way.
Definitely. But like less stern than
McGonagall. More warm and approachable. Mm-hmm. Like more like a Dumbledore.
But just as academic.
Yes. Oh, maybe she's more of a Dumbledore.
She is a Dumbledore.
That's a good compliment. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was back to coaching. So I wanted to remind you guys that we will be doing that. And I wanted to just drop now that I'm closer to it, I feel like it's easier for me to say how many people we could actually expect to start working with. And it's not a lot. I think it's like 10. I was going to say could
10 or under.
Around 10, which is not a lot.
8 to 10 is what I would say.
Yeah. So if you're seriously thinking about doing coaching, we'll talk about it in much more detail next week.
And that's why it's most accurate to say we're accepting applications, because we do have a limited number of spots.
And you have to be a good fit and you have to be ready to do it. And so that's not everyone, and that's okay. That's why we talk to most people who end up filling out that form. To be fair, we don't actually end up talking to everyone, because if you fill out the form and you're clearly not ready enough, I'll let you know. And I'll be like, I don't think we're ready to have a conversation.
We don't want to, I'm
not going to waste your time or mine.
Right. We don't have that conversation prematurely, because that's not helpful to either of us.
Yeah. So, be forewarned, as if alert.
What did I say last week?
You were alerting people. Now I'm warning them. I'm not sure what's worse. I think warning is worse.
Feels worse.
Right. It's like a weather alert versus a warning. It's like that tornado is on the ground now.
Duck in your basement, in your
duck
closet.
And cover. What year is this? This is a little bit off the rails.
I feel like this is going to be, we got a lot to get through too. And we're already getting tangenty. So this is going to be fun.
Tangential. Okay. Well, if you are interested in the prospect of working with us one-on-one, I actually think this conversation will show you the value of coaching. And I'm going to make sure you know it by the end of why what Brene is saying is what coaching is.
As I was going through this, the power of language and being able to articulate
and how coaching is so much about reshaping the way that you think. And you have to do that through talking and through reshaping your language.
We know how powerful coaching is because we're obviously doing it all the time. Right. But this helped understand part of why it's so powerful and impactful.
And why it would be very difficult for you to do it on your own.
And healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So anyway, check out
So make sure you listen next week. We're going to give you a lot more on what's going on with our application process and what that's going to require. And also, if you're not on our email list, we're going to be emailing you about that too. So you know when the doors are open and all of that.
Go take the quiz. That's how you get on our email list. ClarityOnFire.com.
And if you haven't taken the quiz, you should do that anyway.
What are you doing? ClarityOnFire.com/quiz. Or just ClarityOnFire.com.
Then you'll be sure that you know all of the dates for when the applications are open.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's enough. Or you just go review the page now and just know what you're getting yourself into before you actually, sign up for it. Apply. Not sign up. Apply.
I'm
trying to change my language. And on that note, okay. Atlas of the Heart by Brené Brown. Do we need to talk about Brené? I don't think we need to introduce Brené Brown. If you don't know who Brené Brown is, Google. I'm not going to do that work for you. Your thumbs can do that work for you.
I'd be surprised if you're here and you haven't heard of her, but I would also be honored to be your first experience of Brené Brown. So
she's been in the lexicon for so long. And also she's gotten to the point of fame that she was so obsessed. A household name. Like she was so obsessed with Ted Lasso that she had Jason Sudeikis on her podcast. And then he wrote her into an episode, not her physically, like they wrote a joke about her into season 2 of Ted Lasso. So it's like, she's also been in an Amy Poehler movie. Did you know that?
No.
It was the Wine Country movie that Amy Poehler and Tina Fey did a few years ago on Netflix.
Oh my God.
Brene has an actual cameo in that.
That's hilarious.
Like the ladies go up to her table while she's trying to eat and they're like fangirling and she's like, y'all, boundaries. And she like basically is like shuts them down. It's really fun. So
that's a new level of fame.
Exactly. So anyway, we're not going to, if you don't know Brené Brown, you just need to Google Brené Brown. But she has the street cred to back up everything that she's saying in this book. So, okay. You want to read the back of the book to give people a summary of what this is? This is the little teaser. Yeah. And then we'll dive in a bit more.
In Atlas of the Heart, Brown takes us on a journey through 87 of the emotions and experiences that define what it means to be human. As she maps the necessary skills and an actionable framework for meaningful connection, she gives us the language and tools to access a universe of new choices and second chances, a universe where we can share and steward the stories of our bravest and most heartbreaking moments with one another in a way that builds connection.
So we're going to obviously get into what that actually means, but I really recommend that either, if you listen to the book, you read the book. I really want to take a pause though and like plug the HBO special. If you want to take in this kind of content, I thought it was so fun to get to watch her teach with an actual group of people in the audience. And then she's teaching with like clips from movies and TV. So she's taking like, here's like, like what does joy feel like? And then she's actually like taking clips and she's showing you and she's teaching about emotions with stuff that feels relevant and easy to absorb. And I just love, as someone who like loves TV and movies, I was so excited.
And it makes it more experiential. You're not just thinking about joy hypothetically, you're watching people have joyful experiences or whatever the emotion is. And it just makes it really powerful. It's fun. It makes it really fun.
Yeah. And it would be a good intro to someone who is never going to read the book, but might be willing to watch TV with you.
Or if you will mean to read the book and never actually get around to it, then
watch 5 episodes of it on HBO. Okay. So like any good, I think, teacher or story, she doesn't start off diving right into the concept. She starts priming the backstory of why it's important and where it, for her particularly, where it came from, like where her interest in it came from. And she talks about like her own and all of our, because it's incredibly relevant, lack of experience with the language of emotions as a kid. So, and we're going to read some from the book because there's no better way to summarize it than just let her say it. So she said, nothing was discussed or normalized in my family. Not feelings or fears or periods or friend problems or puberty or money issues or extended family members who struggled with addiction and mental health issues. Nothing. We're all good. Any question or attempt to understand the things that were clearly not good was immediately shut down in punitive ways. For children, it's easy for everything to become a source of shame when nothing is normalized. You assume that if no one is talking about it, it must just be you. Like, how many of us didn't, for one reason or another, have emotionally literate households?
Well, I know it's most of us because one of the things that she mentions is after doing a bunch of research on how many emotions people can name as they're experiencing them. Not just that they exist.
I quote this later on, Kristen.
Okay.
Yeah, word for word. Okay. If you want to wait to share that.
Yeah. It's shocking.
It's shocking. A teaser for how shocking it is. Yeah, I'm quoting it later.
We're really bad at it, suffice to say.
Okay.
So because of her experience, and I related to this a lot. I know many of our highly sensitive people are going to highly relate to this.
Yeah.
She talks about how she had to get really good at predicting the future.
And reading what was going on because she didn't.
As a response to
not knowing what the hell was going on.
Childhood, of her family. And a lot of us highly sensitives, we just got really good at that because we felt like it was a survival thing. So I want to read a little bit about her experience there. I knew which snarky comment would produce a laugh and which one would set off a fight. And I knew why. I knew that the comment about too much dessert was funny when someone felt good about how they looked, and how the same comment would unleash a screaming match if someone didn't feel good about themselves that day or that hour. I knew everyone's shame triggers and the unwanted identities that elicited their shame. I knew how it was important for everyone to be perceived, when we could poke fun, and how long we had to get the hell out of Dodge if that got wrong. I knew that everyone in our family was really smart and funny, yet there were flavors of teasing that people used to work out stress or hurt. And once unleashed, that type of teasing wouldn't stop until someone was crying.
Yup.
So in that scenario, you start to pick up on all the subtleties so that you can try to brace yourself for what's about to happen, what explosions are going to happen, or when it's going to be okay.
And this would be why I have anxiety and why most people struggle as highly sensitives, because that was the only thing you had, was your ability to sort of read the room, because no one was talking about what was actually going on under the surface. And so as an adult, Brene says, in some ways a lot has changed, and in other ways not enough has changed. For example, today, if you ask me to identify the biggest barriers to developing brave leaders or cultivating courage in our families or bringing justice to communities, I'd go right back to what I believed was true about people when I was a kid. People will do almost anything to not feel pain, including causing pain and abusing power. God, that's so true.
Have we not seen a lot of that?
Very few people can handle being held accountable without rationalizing, blaming, or shutting down. Yup. You call someone out, they can't handle it.
Yep.
Without understanding how our feelings, thoughts, and behaviors work together, it's almost impossible to find our way back to ourselves and each other. When we don't understand how our emotions shape our thoughts and decisions, we become disembodied from our own experiences and disconnected from each other. She's describing the whole fucking world. Like literally the vast majority of people, even the really, really great, well-meaning ones who are listening to this podcast, like all of us have barriers around language and feelings in some way. Like we got habituated in families who didn't have like healthy, functional dynamics. We didn't know how to talk about it. We were emotionally repressed, or there was explosive, it was explosive. You couldn't hold anyone accountable. You got punished for trying to hold people accountable. And everyone was disconnected from themselves and each other. Like that's the majority of the world that she's describing.
And I think it's really cool, and we'll keep getting into this as we go, how much of this is built on connection. So yes, we're talking about emotion and language around emotion.
But the whole point is not just to intellectually understand it better. It's to connect with your own thoughts and feelings and yourself, and then therefore be able to do it with other people too.
Exactly. That's the root behind all of this. That's why she wrote this book. So it's really about connection, but the route to connection is being able to articulate, understand your own emotions, and to the extent we can, others.
So I don't really think we need to spend a ton of time trying to convince you why this book is critical, but we're going to anyway, because there's so many good nuggets of information that she shares before she even dives into like each individual emotion that she's breaking down in this book of the 87. So go ahead, because I think this is where you're quoting.
This is what I was going to...
Your shocking statistic has come back around.
It's come back around.
Okay.
We're going to read it word for word. 15 years ago, when we first introduced a curriculum based on my shame resilience research, we asked participants in the training workshops to list all the emotions they could recognize and name as they were experiencing them. Over the course of 5 years, we collected those surveys from more than 7,000 people. The average number of emotions named across the survey was 3.
3.
Here are the 3. Happy, sad, angry. Now, again, this is not the emotions that you can name that you know of. It's the
ones you can recognize in yourself
as you are experiencing them. Okay.
She calls it the sad, mad, glad triad. That's it. That's
literally 3.
That's it. Like how I just continue. My mind is still blown by this, and it's not new information.
I know.
Go ahead.
when I think about this data, I think back to a quote from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, probably said that wrong, that I came across in college. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. What does it mean if the vastness of human emotion and experience can only be expressed as mad, sad, or happy? What about shame, disappointment, wonder, awe, disgust, embarrassment, despair, contentment, boredom, anxiety, stress, love, overwhelm, surprise, and all the other emotions and experiences that define what it means to be human?
I'm just going to keep reading because she says, language is our portal to meaning making, connection, healing, learning, and self-awareness. Having access to the right words can open up entire universes. When we don't have the language to talk about what we're experiencing, our ability to make sense of what's happening and share it with others is severely limited. Without accurate language, we struggle to get the help we need. We don't always regulate or manage our emotions and experiences in a way that allows us to move through them productively. And our self-awareness is diminished. Language shows us that naming an experience doesn't give the experience more power. It gives us the power of understanding and meaning.
And this is why we've all learned such bad habits when it comes to emotions, because we're only connected to others as well as we're connected to ourselves. So if we don't even know how we're feeling, how can we possibly really connect with other people and communicate effectively? Because we don't even know how to tell ourselves how we're feeling.
And that's when, and she says this, we go in search of connection with others when we don't know and can't articulate who we are. And I will say, beyond just others, you'll try to find it in a career. You'll try. This is when you don't know who you are because you don't have the language to articulate it, because you can't understand yourself and how you're feeling. You will try to solve that problem with something external
and over-identify with something else or someone else.
Yeah.
And have them tell you how you should feel or what you should do.
And keep in mind, they're also illiterate,
right?
Emotionally speaking, probably. So
no wonder it doesn't work.
Okay. Another huge, why it's so critical to to study this and become more emotionally, I'm just going to call it emotional literacy, because she doesn't actually call it that. That's what we're talking about. It's about increasing our emotional intelligence
and the literacy to be able to talk about it.
Right. So we neurobiologically process emotional pain the same way we process physical pain. She said in her HBO special, that means when I spill hot coffee on my hand, the same area in my brain that lights up when that happens lights up when I experience social rejection. It is processed the same way. So if we are feeling something, but we don't know how to articulate it and we don't know how to make sense of it, we can get stuck in pain. Feelings aren't fluffy. They're just as painful as real physical crap that happens to us.
And she gives a good analogy of, imagine if you went to the doctor and you had a really intense pain in your right shoulder, but you couldn't talk. Maybe you're, I don't know. Maybe she had
she had tape over her
mouth or some sort of, say you had a sore throat, you couldn't talk. You're trying to explain this pain in your shoulder, but you can't use words. How frustrating would that be? You can't tell the doctor how to heal you because you can't even explain what's wrong in the first place.
Yeah.
And that seems silly when we're talking about physical pain, because we can usually describe that. But that's the experience we're in emotionally all the time.
But we don't have the words for it. Because again, most of us can only say, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm mad. But there's a lot more than just that. So if you can't articulate what's actually happening, you can't get help. And you can't move through it and you can't understand it. And
just to take it a step further, language doesn't just describe the feeling that you're having. The right word can actually change how you are experiencing the feeling itself, which is why it's so important to use the correct words so that one emotion doesn't shift into another just because you called it the wrong thing.
Yeah. When you call something stress, you feel more stressed.
We've talked on another podcast about how stress and anxiety and excitement all feel very
She
similar
actually
in the
talks
body.
about that in this book too, and in her HBO special.
But what you call it changes your experience of the physical sensations.
Yes.
Which is why this language piece is not just helpful, it's critical for your actual experience of emotion on a day-to-day basis.
If you're calling something stress when it's actually overwhelm, which we'll get to in a minute, you're not actually accurately describing your experience, and you're probably going to end up making a really bad decision because you don't understand what you're actually feeling.
And you're not going to be able to give yourself what you need.
Right.
In that moment.
So this book is all about helping you develop what she calls your emotional granularity. So the more we learn to label emotions with a nuanced vocabulary, the more we understand and communicate our needs, the easier time we have navigating like the daily ups and downs of life, and the more we regulate our own emotional highs and lows. And then obviously the more psychological well-being, we experience. So the better our mental health becomes. Like it is a proven thing that the more emotionally granular you can become, the healthier your mind is and the more well-being you experience.
So we are really just going to be scratching the surface of this book today. There are, 87 emotions?
We're going to talk about like 10, maybe. I don't even know.
Maybe 10.
Not
I don't even know if we're going to get into that many. So I highly recommend watching the HBO special, maybe just getting the book. And even if you don't read it start to finish, using it as a reference guide. Here are different feelings. What emotional range am I in right now? And the chapters are broken down by
that's what I love is you could
emotions that are categorized in a similar way.
Just for example, you wouldn't even have to know what you're feeling. That's the beautiful thing about the book is you could pull open the table of contents. And chapter number 1 is places we go when things are uncertain or too much. So if you're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling uncertain and I feel like things are too much. Well, I'm going to look at that chapter. Or places we go when we compare ourselves to others, places we go when things don't go as planned. Like that's helpful because we all know what that experience is like, but we don't necessarily know what the feelings that underlie. Well, what happens when I'm comparing? I don't know.
I'm already envisioning myself using this book for myself, but also to help clients be able to better describe the exact experience of the emotions that they're having. And so I do think it's a good book just to have on your bookshelf, pull out when relevant.
Okay.
Which is every day.
So here's how we did this. I pulled out some stuff from the first half of the book and Kristen pulled out some stuff from the second half of the book. And so I'm going to talk about the few things that I pulled out. Well, we're both going to talk about it, but I'll talk about the things I pulled out and then she's going to talk about the things that she pulled out. So first thing I want to talk about, stressed and overwhelmed. 2 things that I would rather not befriend, but that are constant life companions.
This was a really helpful distinction for me.
It is. And she does spend a lot of time talking about it in the HBO special. So I'm not going to use her restaurant analogy because I'm going to let you either read the book or I'm not going to spoil her HBO special for you. But I do want to talk about stress versus overwhelm because it's too important not to. It's too ubiquitous to leave it out.
Yeah.
So, okay. This is the definition that she writes for stress. We feel stressed when we evaluate environmental demand as beyond our ability to cope successfully. This includes elements of unpredictability, uncontrollability, and feeling overloaded. She goes on to say, stressful situations cause both physiological, so body, and psychological, mind and emotion, reactions. However, regardless of how strongly our body responds to stress, so increases in heart rate and cortisol, for example, our emotional reaction is more tied to our cognitive assessment of whether we can cope with the situation than to how our body is reacting. I found this really interesting because I always assumed that this is Brene, not me, that my emotions responded to my body freaking out. But really, my emotions are responding to my thinking assessment of how well I can handle something. Isn't that wild? I was like, oh, to that. It's not actually about what I can handle. It's about what I think I can handle.
What I feel capable of handling.
Which is, again, so many times I'm like, this is why coaching is so helpful. Because if you have a story about why you can't handle something and what's going wrong,
then you're going to feel stressed, even though
there might be nothing to actually be stressed about.
The situation doesn't require you to feel stressed.
Right. But if you believe that's the case, or you're conditioned to be stressed about something that doesn't actually need or require, and you could actually cope with it, but you just, because of whatever story you're telling yourself, you're struggling. That's why coaching and like reframing those types of narratives is so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that was interesting. It gets more interesting when you start comparing and contrasting stress and overwhelm. So I'm going to go on and talk to you about overwhelm now. Okay. So hold on. Okay. I'm going to read you the basic definition of overwhelm first. She says, overwhelmed means an extreme level of stress, an emotional and or cognitive intensity to the point of feeling unable to function. Okay. So overwhelmed is our lives are somehow unfolding faster than the human nervous system and psyche are able to manage well. Mm-hmm. So stressed is I'm feeling put upon,
incapable of handling something.
And I don't feel super capable, but I think stress, the way I'm interpreting it is stress is functional. Like I don't like it. I'm doing it. I don't really feel super capable of handling it well, but I'm functional. I might need help. I might need resource. Overwhelm is I have lost my ability to function.
Well, your next point really drives that home.
Yes.
About the lack of functioning.
This is fascinating. She says, okay, really listen to this. Okay. When you're overwhelmed on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, you're feeling your emotions at a 10. So it couldn't be more intense in terms of like the visceral feeling of overwhelm. You're paying attention to those feelings at a 5. So at best, you're half aware of just how intense it is. And like your cognitive ability has basically kind of gone offline and you understand them at a 2. So like you're all like reactive feeling. You're only even aware of how much you're in reactive half, and you're cognitively understanding it almost none.
Yeah. All emotion, little self-awareness, and almost no ability to articulate
thinking.
It or talk about it.
Your executive function has gone offline when you're overwhelmed, which means you end up making really shit decisions when you are overwhelmed, which pause. You guys don't actually pause the podcast. I want you to think about how many of you very, very reactively from a place of real overwhelm, try to job search.
Oh, I hear this all the time. On your worst days when you come home and you're completely done.
Yeah.
You have no more capacity and you feel like I can't do this one more day. That's when you go job search. Yeah. That is the worst time. Worst time.
Don't do that.
You're not going to make good decisions. And you're not, even if you do submit an application, it's not going to be your best work.
You want to hear a funny story? Just to take a little tangent about what happened to me last week. You know this story, but it's kind of, I don't know if it's stress or overwhelm, but it's funny. I got myself really worked up about a story I was telling myself in my head. I have no proof that what I'm thinking about another person is true. Okay. But I'm getting real worked up in my head about it to the point where I can't sleep and I am stressed. And you want to know what? This happened on the eve of something else that really triggered me. So I was already triggered by something. And then I started obsessing early in the morning, can't go back to sleep, obsessing over this thing. I am worked up about this thing. I am driving to the grocery store. I am feeling my emotions at a 10. I am not super self-aware about just how bad it is. I mean, it's me, so I'm probably more than a 5. My executive function is not going super great, right? And I'm ranting about it in the car on Voxter. I'm like leaving a message about this to someone. And a motherfucking rock flies off a dump truck and smashes my windshield. I mean, not actually, left a nice, you saw it today. It left a nice little, like, I don't know, golf ball sized dent, just a little smatter thing on my windshield. And I was like,
that's it. That's it.
And I was like, okay, I guess I need to reset my energy and my vibration right now because I'm heading off onto a really bad track. And then I got off on the wrong exit because I got distracted by the thing. I had to turn around and I end up behind a car that says positive vibes.
Was it a relief or was it
I laughed.
Angry?
No, I laughed because it made me, because I had literally just been saying, all right, I get it. I'm in a shit mood. I'm keeping myself here.
I'm not making good decisions, but I'm overwhelmed.
I am capable of rerouting myself because I have the emotional literacy after a decade of coaching to be able to do that. And I did not used to have that ability. When I was that reactive, I would just make stupid decisions and they would just spiral deeper and deeper and deeper. It wouldn't stop just when the rock hit the windshield. It would keep going. Right? How many times did I get in fender benders when I was really overwhelmed about the dog and I had to take her to the vet? Do you remember how many times that happened?
Multiple times.
2 or 3 times I had fender bender. The only time I ever got into fender benders was when I had to take the dog to the vet. That is not a coincidence.
I also remember you were really tired. I think you were in a period of insomnia and there was like some other health issues, and you went to go see somebody about that from like a health perspective. And then you fell down the stairs.
I fell down concrete stairs and I busted my leg all up. Yeah. I was bleeding. An old man had to come help me. I literally had knocked my breath out. When our emotions are that heightened, our executive functioning turns off and we make stupid decisions.
This distinction though, but between stressed and overwhelmed was so helpful to me because I constantly I have this story in my head. I'm overwhelmed. That's the feeling I feel like I go to the most often. And to be able to, even just to myself, say, wait, am I stressed or am I overwhelmed? It's like a scale, right? I see stress as the lower end of the same scale. Right. And the overwhelm is when you've hit the top of the scale.
Yeah.
But knowing, because I know that feeling of just like,
can't function.
I cannot function. I'm done. I usually just start to cry and I can't.
Yeah. You usually tell me I have to quit my job.
I have to quit everything.
I don't want to do a single thing ever.
Yep. Versus when I'm stressed, I call it all overwhelm, but you treat them differently.
You do. You can keep going when it's stress. Of course,
some of it's your own belief about what you can handle. And that I can change my capacity.
When you're overwhelmed, you already reached the point where you can't handle it. There's no like talking you out of it anymore. In fact,
the only way to overcome overwhelm is literally to step away and do nothing.
Yes, that is the cure. So the cure for overwhelm is nothingness. It literally means you can't do anything when you have to stop. The only thing you're allowed to do is play. Mindful play, she said, or nothingness are the cures for overwhelmed.
This is so hard because it's so counterintuitive. Right. When you're overwhelmed, you think I can't handle this. There's too much.
I have to work through it. I have to get it all done. You're going to make it worse.
Taking a break feels impossible, but it's the only thing that you can do.
And it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Why you need to reset.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you've blown a light bulb.
You've blown a fuse.
And you have to reset the whole thing. Replace the light bulb.
Yeah. The fuse has to be reset. Okay. Love the distinction between stress and overwhelm. Very helpful. Okay. Now we're going to move on to another this versus that. Jealousy versus envy. Okay. Turns out we are all using these words incorrectly. And she had everyone raise their hand during the HBO special and everyone uses this word wrong. I do. Okay. So interesting. Envy occurs when we want something that another person has. Okay. So like Kristen just got a new car and I am envious of the fact that she has a new car. I'm making this up.
In theory.
No, you didn't. But I'm envious of the fact that you have a new car and I don't, because I want a new car.
Yeah.
Okay. Jealousy is when we fear losing a relationship or a valued part of a relationship that we already have. Kristen just made a new friend. And I'm jealous that friend is going to take time away from my friendship with Kristen. And I feel insecure about her relationship with that person.
Which means jealousy usually requires a third party. Not always a person necessarily, but it's you and then whoever you're jealous of and then something that kind of came in between.
Yes. Did you actually want to read that quote? I mean, I didn't assign it to you, but you can if you want to. Sure. I'll pull it up if you want. I already have it. Okay. Yeah. So the actual, you just said it, but the book says envy typically involves two people and occurs when one lacks something enjoyed by another. The target of envy may be a person or a group of persons, but the focus of that envy is that one lacks something compared with a specific target, whether it be a target individual or a target group. Jealousy typically involves three people and occurs when one fears losing someone to another person. Envy and jealousy result from different situations, generate distinct appraisals, and produce distinctive emotional experiences. So they are not the same thing.
And that's a helpful distinction because again, how you respond to it depends on where is it coming from. What's triggering it in the first place?
Yes. I'm going to actually quote why the distinction matters on page, 29. Not that you guys care what page it's on, but where did I say this was? Last paragraph. Okay. All right. Regardless of whether we choose to change our language or not, because she's like, listen, you can still call it jealousy if you want to be like, oh my God, I'm so jealous that you took this trip and I didn't. But whether or not you're choosing to actually change it, understanding the nuances can help us ask ourselves the right questions when we're experiencing jealousy or envy. If we're feeling afraid or sad or angry, or we're deep in coveting mode, we have the tools now to ask ourselves, okay, am I fearful of losing something I value to another person? Or do I want something someone else has? If I want something that someone else has, do I want to see them lose it? Or is it not about that? If I'm scared I'm losing something important to me, what kind of conversation do I need to have with that person?
I love this because I realize I use envy as a helpful clarifying tool with a lot of my clients. And I've been calling it jealousy.
Same.
But it's specifically, what can you look out and see that someone else has that you want? Because it's a clarifying
way
of observing the world.
It's not like you don't want them to have it, though that does exist. It's called malicious envy. It's like, I want that and I can't believe that bitch got it and I didn't. She deserves to burn in hell and
That's
I want that thing.
One of my dogs about the other one when I give it attention. He gets super jealous maliciously.
Okay, well, she doesn't talk about malicious jealousy, but you know what? I think that's a thing too.
I think it's a thing.
Yeah.
No, he's like, I don't want her to get attention and I want to get the attention and I'm angry about that.
But that's just jealousy, period, right? Like that's like, I'm afraid of losing something to a third party.
That's true.
It could be a dog or it could be a person.
He gets super jealous.
Okay. So the last thing in my section that I wanted to talk about was resentment, which this blew my mind. And I shared it with one of my clients. It blew her mind too. So we're going to talk about it. All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay. For years, I assumed that resentment was a form of anger related to my perfectionism. I mostly felt resentful toward people whom I perceived to be not working or sacrificing or grinding or perfecting or advocating as hard as I was. You want to see me go into full tilt resentment and just watch someone tell me, yeah, I stopped working on it. It's not exactly perfect, but it's good enough. Or I know it's due tomorrow, but I'm wiped out, so I'm packing it in. Or I don't get involved in those issues. They don't really affect me. Ugh, it's on. I've spent decades working on my perfectionism and that helped, but my resentment remained an issue. Then, all of a sudden, in one sentence, my life changed. I was interviewing the emotions researcher and writer Mark Brackett for our Unlocking Us podcast, and we were chatting before the actual recording started. Out of the blue, I said, before we start, I've got a personal question. Is resentment part of the anger family? Without hesitation, Mark replied, no, resentment is part of envy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, holy shit, she says. I'm not mad because you're resting. I'm mad because I'm so bone tired and I want to rest. But unlike you, I'm going to pretend that I don't need to. I'm not furious that you're okay with something that's really good and imperfect. I'm furious because I want to be okay with something that's really good and imperfect. Your lack of work is not making me resentful. My lack of rest is making me resentful.
That is so huge because, again, when we don't know that, we think we're mad at the other person, or we think that they have offended us in some way, or we feel like it's their fault.
Yeah.
Because resentment is like, oh, you're doing a thing that I'm annoyed about. But the annoyance doesn't come from the fact that they're doing it. The annoyance is because you want some version of that.
Yeah. And you know what? I was thinking about this because I'm like, I was resisting this. Like, nah, I feel like some of my resentment is just rage. But then I thought about it and I was like, okay, I'm examining, and I'm not going to talk specifically about what I'm talking about. Kristen will understand what I'm talking about. I think some of my resentment is like about how other people can treat me and others. And I'm like, well, no, I just don't want to be treated badly. I'm not envious of how they're treating people. And then I'm like, oh, I think what I'm envious of is they get away with it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't if I did that. Like, it's not like I want to treat people like that. It's that I'm really frustrated and I'm angry and I'm envious that I live in a world where there's a double standard.
Yeah.
Like, and I'd love to be able to treat people like that and have no consequences, but I can't. You know what I'm saying?
At least have the option. Not that we would want, but still.
Right.
Like,
but it's like, it's not fair. Like they're like that double standard. And like what I'm envious of is the fact that there's not equality
some
around
rage, some actual just pure rage, but some resentment where you're like, there's something underneath of that that's like, it's not fair. And that's what a resentment feels like. It's not fair, which means like you have something that I don't get to have. And I'm resentful about that.
Yeah.
Whether I want it or not, I still feel like I don't get to have it.
Yeah.
And it's so,
and what I actually want
helpful to be able to see, because I have a client that was sensing some resentment in her partner and was like, well, what is that about? Like, I felt like she had to get defensive, felt like she had to be like, well, but I worked for this. And the more we talked about this, it was clear the resentment was not anger. It was, you figured some stuff out and I haven't figured it out for myself yet. And so I feel like I'm over here working so hard and you're relaxing. Well, that's because you kind of figured out the balance of what you need. And when we had that conversation, she was able to go back to her partner and say, well, how do we get you a version of what I've given myself? What a productive conversation. Instead of me defending that and you feeling like it's unfair. So helpful, not just in recognizing your own emotions and others, but actually being able to do something productive about it.
Or at least have a really good idea to take to therapy.
Exactly.
Oh,
good language.
I'm actually envious because I'm in a relationship with someone who gets to act however they want with no consequences. They get to be themselves with freedom. And when I try to do that, it's punitive. And like, there's consequences and I don't like that dynamic. Right. Like, so many more words and feelings unlocked when you can actually describe with emotional granularity what's happening. All right. So I'm going to read you her new definition of resentment for us. Okay. Resentment is the feeling of frustration, judgment, anger, better than, and or hidden envy related to perceived unfairness or injustice. It's an emotion that we often experience when we fail to set boundaries or ask for what we need, or when expectations let us down because they were based on things we can't control, like what other people think, what they feel, or how they're going to react. Yeah, that's it. That's right. That's it right there.
It's much more uncomfortable and it's much more accurate.
Yep. Okay, thus concludes my section.
Okay.
Good stuff.
I had so much trouble narrowing this down. I actually picked 4.
Oops.
Sorry in advance, but
it's going to be a long episode, but that's fine.
But there's more like for each of these, there's a really critical point that I just was so helpful to me that I was like, I just got to relay that to you all.
Okay, great. Well, go ahead.
So the first one I wanted to highlight was hope. And I'm going to read a few quotes here. It says, we need hope like we need air. To live without hope is to risk suffocating on hopelessness and despair, to risk being crushed by the belief that there is no way out of what is holding us back and no way to get what we desperately need. I feel like this one comes up
depression is
in
the
coaching when you feel like helpless.
Yeah.
And that's where
depressed. To me, this is depressed.
It is. Hopelessness is it either is synonymous with depression or it leads to depression. There's a very close tie there. And then she said, here's what we need to experience hope. There's 3 things. Okay. So in order to actually feel like there's a reason to have hope about something, you have to have these 3 things. The ability to set realistic goals. So essentially, I know where I want to go.
I already see where this is going. This is coaching. Go ahead.
This is coaching. And this is why I was like, I hear a version of this. So we don't really talk about the emotion behind it, but the craving for, I need to know where I'm going. And
I need hope.
You need hope.
Yeah.
You need to feel like there's a hope.
Yeah.
2, we are able to figure out how to achieve those goals, including the ability to stay flexible and develop alternative pathways.
Right.
So essentially the mentality of, I know how to get there. I'm persistent and I can tolerate disappointment and try new paths again and again.
Oh, yep. That's what I tell people is important. Yes. We're not just going to figure out one way to get there. You got to become someone who can stay flexible.
This is resilience. And you have to believe in your own resilience.
You have to be resilient.
And then 3, we have agency. We believe in ourselves. So not just that we know where we're going and we know some of the ways to get there.
We believe we can do it.
We believe that we can do it. Yeah. I can do this. I have what it takes. Without those things, you're going to start to lose hope.
Yeah.
And that is so dangerous. It's that slippery slope down into depression. So I thought that was such a clarifying way to describe what is required in order to spark hope.
Agreed.
One more piece about hope that I just thought was so interesting. It feels like such a positive emotion, but she says, hope is a function of struggle. We develop hope not during the easy or comfortable times, but through adversity and discomfort. So it springs out of some of the hardest things, even though it itself feels like flowery and pretty and rainbows and butterflies and hopeful. That's not where it comes from.
Nope. Hope is a muscle. And again, like if an ingredient of hope is resilience, then the only way you can develop resilience is when things go wrong.
It's through struggle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's why coaching is valuable, is because it reestablishes hope.
Those three things are the purpose and intention of coaching, if you ask me. Set realistic goals, figure out how to get there, and trust that you can handle whatever gets
believe
thrown
in your
way,
ability to do it.
And believe in yourself.
Yeah. That's it.
I mean,
good job. We got into a good career path then, apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. Okay. Love hope.
We're going to take a very sharp turn away from home.
Okay, great.
Into humiliation.
Yeah.
This one, I mean, I read it and I read like the little description of this section, and it was like embarrassment and humiliation and blah, blah, blah. And to me, humiliation felt kind of like a synonym for embarrassment. It is not. It is a very distinctive and very dangerous thing. And I was like, we got to highlight this. So a couple quotes. Based on the research, we can define humiliation as the intensely painful feeling that we've been unjustly degraded, ridiculed, or put down, and that our identity has been demeaned or devalued.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, there was a particular paragraph that I read that I was like, oh, damn, this is really important. So I'm going to read you a little bit here.
Okay.
Until recently, I held the belief that humiliation, though detrimental, was a less dangerous emotional experience than shame. And if any of you know Brené Brown, she's done a lot of shame research. So she imagined it's like lower on the scale than shame.
Or higher on the scale, if shame is the bottom.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Not as intense, not as dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
A collection of studies changed my mind. In 2003, Susan Harder and colleagues issued a report that examined the media profiles of 10 prominent school shooters between 1996 and 1999. Harder and her colleagues reported that in every case, the shooters described how they had been ridiculed, taunted, teased, harassed, or bullied by peers because of their inadequate appearance or social or athletic behavior, and spurned by someone in whom they were romantically interested, or put down in front of other students by a teacher or school administrator. Essentially, all events that led to profound humiliation.
Yeah. Ugh.
It is dangerous. And she goes on to talk about some of the violence that can come, that does not come from embarrassment. That doesn't even always come from shame. Well, it comes from this humiliation, which is essentially, you shamed me and I didn't feel like I deserved it.
You know what? I have no idea, like, if she would agree with me about this, but what I'm getting is embarrassment is like, oh, something happened, but it's not about me. It's like, okay, so accidentally fell on my face in front of people, and that's embarrassing, but it's not about who I am as a person.
She actually describes embarrassment as the temporary state of being kind of embarrassed by something, but that happens to other people. Like, you don't take it very personally.
It's not about you. It's not
like,
personal.
oh, I tripped. It was embarrassing. Or like, oh, I said something kind of silly, but people do that.
But it's not about my identity.
No.
Whereas shame is about you. Shame is about like, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. Humiliation is like public shame.
Yeah.
That's why it's so potent, is because you can feel ashamed in private, but humiliation is shame in public.
Yeah.
And
that's why there's one more piece of this that she's very good about bringing a lot of this back to social justice. And she mentions it a lot in her HBO special and in the book itself. And she says, I know we all have deeply passionate political and cultural beliefs, but shame and humiliation will never be effective social justice tools. They are tools of oppression.
You can't humiliate anyone into feeling good or doing better.
So even if you feel like you are completely in the right and someone else is completely in the wrong, humiliating them is never the answer.
No.
It just creates more division. And frankly, it creates more violence.
Yeah, clearly.
So that to me, I was like, oh, that went a lot deeper than I expected it to.
Yeah. And it might explain, I mean, again, most people listening to this are not the kind of people who are out and about humiliating others and bullying other people.
But I know you see it. I know you see it happening in the media, in the news, on social media.
Yeah. And this is why it feels icky.
Yeah.
I know a lot of you feel gross when you look at that stuff. And I bet some of you also have felt humiliated. And now you understand maybe why it felt so bad.
Yep.
And why it was toxic. Like if someone in your life makes a habit of humiliating you, well, that's abusive.
Yes.
Just full stop.
Toxic, abusive, like unsustainable. So that one I think was just very current.
Yeah. Okay. All right. 2 down, 2 to go.
Two to go. Another distinction that just struck me.
This versus that.
Yeah, this versus that. I don't have a whole long thing to get into about it, but I think it's an interesting distinction, which is the difference between belonging and fitting in. So first of all, I think I've seen this quote from her before, but it's so good that I had to put it back in here.
Oh, yeah. This is my favorite thing. Probably.
I think it is. We have to belong to ourselves as much as we need to belong to others. Any belonging that asks us to betray ourselves is not true belonging. So first of all, when we're talking about belonging, first and foremost, you have to belong to yourself. You cannot belong anywhere.
Well, and you're about to say this, but I'm just going to read it from your list because it's what I was thinking. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else.
Yeah.
Which is why fitting in is almost the opposite of belonging in a lot of important ways.
And I've really wanted to bring this concept in of belonging versus fitting in, because I know we have a lot of people pleasers
a ton
in our community, and people pleasers think fitting in is going to make them feel like they belong.
Yeah.
But it's not the
It'll
same
make
thing.
you feel rejected because you know that in order to fit in, you had to silence some aspect of yourself or just not be your full self, which is a rejection.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a covert rejection.
Yep. And it doesn't actually give you the feeling of belonging that you're so craving.
Of course not.
In fact, sometimes it makes you feel more isolated.
Totally.
So, said in a different way, I think she actually had some kids or teenagers tell her how they perceive the difference. And some of the quotes were so good. So one of them you just read, and another one was, if I get to be me, I belong. If I have to be like you, I fit in.
Yep.
Imagine if middle schoolers knew about this concept.
Damn.
Right?
I would have loved to know that in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if I ever have kids, like, I don't care what they learn. They're learning this from me.
Yep.
Like they're learning emotional literacy from me. And if they've got that, I don't care if they can do math. Do you know what I mean? Like, whatever. They got a calculator for that. I don't care.
This concept alone creates so much angst in school. So much angst. We're all craving to fit in and then feeling like we don't actually belong.
And then being humiliated for not fitting in.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's
and then that creates violence. And just oof.
Vicious cycle. Okay. My last concept, I promise. These, I would not have thought that these were connected, but there's a really cool connection point that she makes to these. First is gratitude. So I'm going to read a little bit about gratitude. We hear about it all the time. We know it's important. It's almost like overdone. It's almost a cliche, frankly.
It shouldn't be, but it's kind of become one. Mm-hmm. It's been overdone.
But I'm going to read her research into a new perspective on why it's so important.
Okay.
Research on emotion shows that positive emotions wear off quickly. Our emotional systems like newness. They like novelty. They like change. We adapt to positive life circumstances so that before too long, the new car, the new spouse, the new house, they don't feel so new and exciting anymore. But gratitude makes us appreciate the value of something. And when we appreciate the value of something, we extract more benefits from it. We're less likely to take it for granted. In effect, I think gratitude allows us to participate more in life. And that sentence alone, like, I'm bought in. We notice the positives more, and that magnifies the pleasures you get from life. Instead of adapting to goodness, we celebrate goodness. We spend so much time watching things, movies, computer screens, sports, but with gratitude, we become greater participants in our lives as opposed to spectators. I never heard that description of why gratitude is so important. We get to actually participate in life more and extend the good experiences because they're going to wear off quickly.
You're just kind of reliving them.
Yeah, you get to milk them for all they're worth. So that to me, I was like, all right, I'm more bought into that. It seems pretty different from gratitude, but they'll connect, I promise. Called Foreboding Joy. And I love this definition. When we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. No emotion is more frightening than joy, which can I just read that again? Because that seems, that seems wrong, but it's right.
No, it's 100% right.
No emotion is more frightening than joy, because we believe if we allow ourselves to feel joy, we are inviting disaster. So foreboding joy is that sense of things are so good right now, I'm scared.
Yeah.
She said parents feel this all the time. They'll look at
yeah.
their child and be like, I love this child so much.
What if something terrible happens to them? Yeah. I know.
So you can't really fully experience the joy because the foreboding is shadowing it over. So here's the connection point. The good news. In our research, we found that everyone who showed a deep capacity for joy had one thing in common. They practiced gratitude. In the midst of joy, there's often a quiver, a shudder of vulnerability. Rather than using that as a warning sign to practice imagining the worst case scenario, the people who lean into joy use that quiver as a reminder to practice gratitude.
Yeah, I'm so grateful
gratitude
for what I have.
Is the cure to the foreboding part of joy.
Yeah, gotcha. You know, I want to go back for a second to what you said about when we lose our tolerance for vulnerability, joy becomes foreboding. I think everything becomes foreboding when you lose your tolerance for vulnerability.
That is a good point.
Right?
Yep.
I have coached a lot of people who don't have a high tolerance for vulnerability. Whether it's risk taking, whether it's having an uncomfortable conversation with someone, whether it's just articulating what they think or how they feel out loud. They've maybe never had a high tolerance for vulnerability because they've never been allowed to take a lot of risks. You know, I have a lot of clients who either grew up in a household, you know, like most of us, that was not super emotionally literate. And so they didn't learn how to express themselves. So it feels hard to say what they're thinking or how they feel. And it feels really, really scary to do that. But I also have a lot of people who have been encouraged to just play it safe their whole lives and never take risks, and who have never been allowed to fail, like whose parents often made it seem like a bad thing that if you failed, so they never tried anything. So they come into adulthood a mess of like anxiety because everything is scary. Talking about yourself is scary. Having an opinion is scary. Like thinking a different thought than someone else is scary. Having confrontation is scary. Thinking about a new job path is scary. Everything's scary. And so vulnerability is so important because it's the practice of doing things that make you feel exposed and realizing that you can overcome them and that you can develop resilience and that you will be fine. So the lower tolerance you have for vulnerability, the more foreboding you're going to have for life, not just joy.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because it made me think of another point I wanted to make sure we just quickly touch on, which is the difference between a state and a trait. And she talks about a lot of these different emotions that she goes through.
Like, let's use anxiety as one of them. Yeah, because she talks about how that can be both like a temporary state that you visit, but it can also be something that's more internal and inherent to you. A
state that almost starts to describe your character or how you respond.
It becomes a trait
more often than not. And what you just described, when we become uncomfortable with vulnerability long-term,
pathologically,
then a lot of these things start to become
traits, not states.
And I don't want anybody to think that if they consider themselves to have the trait of anxiety,
because I do,
or the trait of depression,
I do,
or the trait of whatever, that
that's it.
You're stuck.
Yeah, you're stuck. You're fucked.
I think of a trait as a really prolonged state that went on for so long that it became a habituated way of being and thinking and reacting.
And you might have been born into it.
It doesn't mean you can't change it. It doesn't mean like you're an introvert. That's it. You're never going to be anything but an introvert. Like there are certain things that I think are personality, like introversion and extroversion.
Yeah.
I don't think emotions are
think
personality.
No, I think that some people are obviously for a million reasons more highly sensitive or more prone to certain states than others. But to think that you're fixed in that state and that is not changeable is no.
Guess what? That's hopeless. That's hopelessness.
That's hopeless. Yeah. So even if you are an anxious person by nature, you feel like that's a trait, for example, it doesn't mean that a lot of it isn't just a really very, very deeply prolonged state that you could work yourself out of and become way less triggered by it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the end of your section.
Yes.
All right.
There's just one more. She put a really nice bow on the end of this book that I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
I still recommend listening to her audiobook or watching her HBO special and having her talk through it, because this is like the culmination of her research. So she's the best to describe this.
We're just peons.
I want to give
summarizing what she said.
She says this is her grounded theory on cultivating meaningful connection after all the research she did in this whole book. Cultivating meaningful connection is a daring and vulnerable practice that requires, there's three things: grounded confidence, the courage to walk alongside others, and story stewardship. She gives a really, most of those I think are pretty self-explanatory.
Do you want me to read story stewardship?
But I really liked her definition of that. So yeah, read that.
Okay. Story stewardship means honoring the sacred nature of story, the ones we share and the ones we hear, and knowing that we've been entrusted with something valuable, or that we have something valuable that we should treat with respect and care.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that surprised her as she was putting together this grounded theory was that knowing and applying the language of human experience and emotion was a key property of all three of those major categories that support meaningful connection. So if we don't have the language, we can't, all three of those are negatively affected, and we cannot feel connected to ourselves and others. So that's like the key.
Yeah.
To the experience.
Yeah. Connection. It's about being confident in your,
and part of that is I know who I am. I know what I'm experiencing, and I know how to articulate that,
articulate it,
what to do about it.
Being able to walk alongside others means I can do that for other people. I can make them feel seen and heard. I understand what they're experiencing.
And she said,
I don't make it about me.
Yeah, I'm not leading them, but I'm also not following them. We're walking alongside together. That's real connection.
I'm not making their journey about me. I'm not getting triggered by the fact that they're having their own experience. And then story stewardship.
I can respectfully listen to and also share stories, because that's how we connect.
Yeah.
So you have to be a good steward of other people's stories. And you also have to believe that your stories
and respect your
have
own
meaning and power and are vulnerable enough to share them.
Well, that's also a grounded theory of why coaching works.
It really is.
And why we do what we do. Thanks, Brené Brown.
Now, again,
what a really good book.
I feel like that was a lot. And also, we just scratched the surface.
That was an iceberg, tip of the iceberg situation. And even her HBO special is like a little bit of the iceberg of the book. And I'm sure the book is like
all 87 emotions.
No, I think she covers 30 in the HBO special. So not even half, maybe like a third. So the book is great. I wish I had become, I know that you, relatively speaking, you and I were emotionally literate way earlier than a lot of people, but I wish I had understood some of the difficult things I struggle with earlier, because I think about my experience with being highly sensitive and anxiety and depression. Literally until a couple of years ago, I didn't know that's what they were. Until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I wasn't labeling them like that. I just thought that I was triggered all the time. I thought I was angry. And because I was feeling those things, I would look for reasons why I was feeling them that was external to me. I'd be like, well, it must be because
to try to understand
my career's not going well, or it must be because my friend did this. Because I couldn't understand and like really deeply articulate what I was feeling and what it's called, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't heal it. I couldn't treat it. And now that I have, way better language around all of that, oh my God, it's so much easier to handle like she said, you can handle the ups and downs of life so much better because you know what's happening to you. You don't feel like you're being spun around in this like cyclone of confusion. It's life-changing to be able to articulate and label how you feel.
And for those of you who are parents,
oh my gosh,
imagine the power not only to understand your own emotions, but to be able to help your kids express how they're feeling and communicate it in an accurate and productive way.
Imagine having a 4-year-old who's throwing a tantrum, and instead of being like, why are you mad? You're like, it seems
Are you feeling envy that your sister got to go to the movies? Yeah.
It seems like you're feeling a little envious right now. Or it seems like you're feeling disappointed or rejected. Like those are different things. And just imagine being able to have a parent who could do that for you. I mean, I can't imagine because I just don't know.
It's wild. It's wild. But that's what this allows us to do for ourselves and for like the next generation. So at the very least, if you're a parent and you want to help your kids communicate
or
how they're feeling better.
A person who spends time with small children or like adults who behave like your small children.
And nephews. We all know some of those.
Right. Yeah. Being able to validate how people feel in a nuanced way will unlock a lot of emotions and realizations in those people. And just, it's so important. Okay.
And to give them the words, because we can't describe how they're feeling for them. No, that's one of the distinctions she makes. We can't know how someone's feeling.
But you can offer them options.
But we can say, are you feeling this or are you feeling this? Yeah. And then we can actually have a productive conversation when they can say, no, it's this.
Well, I mean, that was a lot, but I hope that you enjoyed that and also agree how important.
I hope it intrigued some of you to go dig a little bit deeper into Brené's work on this because there's so much good stuff. I mean, I'm telling you, I cut half of the outline.
Yeah, I had to cut mine down too.
I was like, oh, there's so many more I want to bring. So it was really hard to do. So this is just a teaser. So go read the book, watch the HBO special. Let us know what you think. Leave us a comment.
Get someone to watch it with you, like a friend or your spouse.
Talk about connection. What a good connection point.
I mean, this is why, this is a whole nother conversation. This is why a lot of people are in unhappy marriages is because they might have the ability to articulate or they're trying and their spouse doesn't and isn't interested. And like, oh, damn, I don't have the solution to that right now. But that's a huge.
Well, but part of it is they may not have the language.
Right. They don't have the right. So
if more of us had the language to describe and communicate, the better connected we would be.
Yeah.
Even in our closest relationships, maybe even more so in our closest relationships.
So I don't know, try to get someone else on this boat with you. Let's try to make the world a little more emotionally intelligent.
Plus Brené Brown, she's funny. She's relatable. She's very easy to watch. She's like
your best friend's mom. She's like the cool mom.
She's a really cool mom who you're like, can I go over to your house and hang out with your mom?
That's exactly
But she's that relatable. She's just like a normal person.
Yeah.
And she tells her stories like we've all been there. We know what she's talking about. So it's fun to watch. It's not going to be a bore to get somebody boring. To get them to watch it.
No, there's clips from Avengers in there. Okay. Your husband will like it.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, we will be back next week with a new Dear Rachel. And of course, we'll be taking applications for coaching clients at that time.
And we'll tell you more about it then.
We'll also, walk you through what's changed since last time. And it'll be interesting, I think. Okay.
See you next week.
Bye.